and gentlemen, this is the Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration, meeting number 16. This meeting is televised. We have two items today. The first hour will be, we have the Minister Alexander as our guest to talk on the supplementary estimates. The second hour we are continuing our study on the report of the protection of women in our immigration system. So we will proceed. Mr. Alexander, thank you very much for coming with your guests. We have Mr. Orr, who was just here, Robert Orr, who was here just recently. Mr. Linkletter, of course, Assistant Deputy Minister, Strategic Program Policy. He's been here many times as well, as Mr. Matson, Tony Matson, Assistant Deputy Minister and Chief Financial Officer, and the Deputy Minister, Biggest.
Biggest, that's right.
That's why I wanted you to say it, because I'd blow it. The Honourable Chris Alexander is here. You have the floor, sir. He has up to 10 minutes. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Merci, Monsieur le Président, de nous avoir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
For having us today. Bonjour tout le monde. I'm delighted to be here with so many of the senior leadership of the Department of Citizenship and Immigration to present our department's supplementary estimates C for fiscal year 2013-14. L'allocation la plus importante.
The most significant allocation is $35.5 million in additional funding to meet our obligations under the requirements of the Canada-Quebec Accord on Immigration. And as you know, this accord gives the government of Quebec exclusive responsibility for immigrant and integration services in return for financial compensation from the Government of Canada.
Allocation of $3.9 million to support immigration for official language minority communities as part of the roadmap for Canada's official languages. En total,
overall, under the official languages roadmap for language duality, 2013-2018, our government has invested $149.5 million over 5 years in initiatives related to official languages and immigration. This is a sizable amount. Most of this funding, $2.3 million, will be invested in promotion and recruitment activities in Canada and abroad. Primarily through expanding the frequency and number of locations of existing events, such as the Destination Canada Job Fair. These activities have been very successful so far. A number of you, I think, are probably familiar with this job fair. Through these successful job fairs, we help to connect French-speaking or bilingual skilled workers with employers across Canada. We are always struck by the number of Francophones outside Quebec who were not born in Canada, who are immigrants, and I can give you some statistics on this point, probably statistics that you're not familiar with. The population of the Yukon at present is comprised of 14% Francophones, which is quite surprising. And I think that this gives you an idea of the effect of our Francophone immigration policy outside Quebec.
Is on the rise. We want it to increase even further. Nous avons constaté une croissance dans le nombre d'immigrants.
We've noted an increase in the number of Francophones settling in provinces outside Quebec since 2006, and we will continue to promote initiatives to strengthen Canada's Francophonie in all provinces and territories. In fact, in November 2013, I had the opportunity to launch the first ever National Francophone Immigration Week. And I think it was very much appreciated in Ontario, the largest province, as well as in New Brunswick, Manitoba, and the other provinces. Through these initiatives, we are helping Francophone and other immigrant populations successfully integrate into Canadian society. Unfortunately, the previous government ignored this issue of Francophone immigration for 13 years, and our government is meeting this challenge now of strengthening Francophone immigration. We intend to continue to encourage immigration outside the main metropolitan centers. I think that until 1992, our immigrants were mainly concentrated in the three largest cities, but now we've noted that rural areas are starting to receive their share of immigrants.
Successful integration of newcomers across Canada, both into the labour market and into their new communities, wherever they settle. And let me just give you a couple more of the highlights from these supplementary B estimates so that we're all clear on how the numbers change the outlook for our department and reflect the priorities and program reforms that we continue to make. I mentioned funding for the Canada-Quebec Accord, which is an obligation and which continues to grow in accordance with the terms of that accord. The funding to promote official languages is there, needed adjustment to reflect the strength of our commitment under the roadmap. Item 3 is the funding for write-off of debts from uncollectible immigration loans. This is a standard procedure that we have. We give loans to large numbers of refugees and some other categories of immigrants. The collection rate is something like 91%, but there are some loans that are not collected, and we're adjusting the amount here to reflect that. Under item 6, you see several of the available authorities that we have had to take advantage of this year in order to fund other priorities because we weren't fully using those authorities this year. This is a standard procedure, and I can give you some more details about which appropriations are there. One of them is the biometrics initiative. Another was reductions in an initiative to fund workplace technology devices, some 0.9 million savings for the entry-exit perimeter initiative, some savings in the federal skilled worker return of fees. These are all authorities that we had, which weren't fully used, so the money is reallocated through these available authorities to help us meet the adjustments in these supplementary B estimates. Same goes for statutory appropriations, where we have basically decided not to refund as large a number of the federal skilled worker backlog. We'll complete the refunding of that program, I believe, next year. But that money allows us, again, to meet the requirements of this year. Then on budgetary votes, on transfers, there are essentially 5 different transfers. And these are standard procedures that reflect our intense and complicated relationships with sister departments. We're receiving some money back from Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development. We're receiving some money back from Shared Services Canada. And we are transferring some money to the Canadian Border Services Agency. And then there are 2 transfers that reflect the fact that we have assumed responsibility as of this past summer for International Experience Canada, this very successful program that used to be delivered by Foreign Affairs and is now delivered by us. Those are really the highlights, and that is the substance of the supplementary C estimates for this year. But if I have a couple more minutes, Mr. Chair.
One.
I have one. Let me just underline that our government's number 1 priority remains jobs, economic growth, opportunity for Canadians, and we see our immigration programs as absolutely central to achieving these goals. Many sectors of our economy now have large growing demands for skilled workers, and we need to work hard to implement our expression of interest system, to implement all the reforms we've announced in recent months, to make sure that we are serving those economic needs properly. As a member from Markham Unionville knows, Mr. McCallum, very high growth in his community, in his growing city in information technology and communications. J'ai eu une réunion récemment.
I had a meeting recently with the Canadian Entertainment Software Association. I don't know whether the members of the committee were aware of the fact that we are the 3rd largest country in the world for the production of video games, films, animated films, after the United States and Japan. And they are unable to keep this sector growing without flexible immigration programs that are able to meet the requirements of a very dynamic economy.
Exciting questions to ask of you. We'll start with Mr. Menengakis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, and to all the senior officials from CIC for joining us today. Minister, back in 2008, when our government introduced the roadmap for linguistic duality, about $1.1 billion program that was very successful and was renewed in 2013, going to 2018. We heard from many witnesses at the Committee for Official Languages where that was studied as to a lot of the advantages and benefits of investing in linguistic duality across this country and all the different communities. And I'm delighted to see in your presentation, to hear from you today, $149.5 million for official languages with respect to immigration. I wonder if you can elaborate, please, on the many benefits of this program with respect to immigration.
Thank you, Mr. Menengakis. I mean, we know we have to invest in this program, and we want more than ever to invest in this program, this roadmap, because we've always had Francophones, French Canadians in all parts of this country, but even more so, we know it is part of who we are. Ça fait partie de l'identité canadienne. Ça fait.
This is part of the Canadian identity, and it is part of our immigration programs. It is something that Canadians throughout Canada wish to see. And never has there been such an interest for immersion programs in our schools, including in my constituency of Ajax-Pickering, where Francophones are the only new schools being built because of demand among the English-speaking population for French language instruction.
To have successful Francophone immigration to all parts of the country, we need settlement services, we need support, we need language training, we need a whole network that wasn't there in the past. We've tripled, in some provinces quadrupled, the support for settlement services. Often, in every case, there is a Francophone component, and that is making it more and more attractive for Francophones from France, from Haiti, from Cameroon to go to places like Vancouver or the Yukon. They're not always there in large numbers, but they go because they find the services that they need, and that is absolutely the right thing for Canada. That reflects our history, it reflects our identity today, and it certainly reflects our future.
Is there a program that Francophone immigrants typically use more than others as a stream to come into Canada?
I would have to get back to you on that. I think they use all of our streams quite reliably. I mean, I have to be honest with you. Our target is 4% of Francophone immigration to Canada per year, economic immigration, out of our total immigration. And I assume that's 4% out of the number, not including our Quebec immigration, right, which is roughly 75,000. So you're talking here about 4% out of 195,000, 200,000, depending on where we're going. So let's say 190,000. We're not there yet in terms of reaching that goal, but we are on our way there. The resources we have give us the assurance that we can get there. And we're not going to concentrate on one stream. We're going to make sure that Francophones feel comfortable using all of our streams. Many are coming as students, which means Canadian Experience class. But I think you see some countries, Francophone countries, still very prominent in federal skilled workers and not necessarily going to Quebec, using the federal skilled workers program as opposed to the Quebec skilled workers program. And the provincial nominee program, obviously, is available and strongly used, especially in those provinces that have a higher level of provincial service in French, which would include New Brunswick, obviously officially bilingual, but also Ontario, Manitoba, and others. BCG.
Just stop the clock for a minute. Ms. Biggis, if you could direct, Mr. Alexander just gave us an undertaking. Perhaps you could give it to the clerk.
How much time is left on this?
We've frozen the clock at 4:43, so you've got enough time.
Yes, exactly.
Minister, is it fair to say, with respect, with the $149.5 million in the immigration budget for official languages and immigration, that if most, if not all of that money is spent outside of Quebec, is to integrate Francophone immigrants into communities that are not Francophone speaking?
Absolutely.
Would that be fair to say that?
That is fair to say.
Okay.
Although, obviously, under the feuille de route, we provide support for English language minorities in Quebec as well.
Do you feel that with the advent of the new EOI program, that is something that Francophone-speaking people can also avail themselves of? Because we are a country that's bilingual.
Absolutely.
Wouldn't the EOI program give an additional benefit to people that can speak that language?
Absolutely. I mean, everyone is going to like EOI because it will be faster than ever. It will be it will be a closer match between their skills, whether they're English-speaking or French-speaking, and Canadian needs. And it will show that Canada is once again at the forefront of modernizing its immigration programs. Yes, Australia and New Zealand have had a system similar to EOI beforehand, but we're doing it on a larger scale. And I have every confidence we're going to do it better than any other country has implemented such a program, and that will be exciting for talented people around the world. Le français reste une langue.
French is still a language that is used to a large extent internationally in all parts of the world, and I think it is a strength for Canada to be able to attract French-speaking immigrants from countries throughout the world and to have them settle in Canada and to make use of their abilities in our trade relations as part of our growth strategy.
Is a very important asset for Canada, and we want our immigration programs to magnify that asset.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Ms. Blanchette-Lamothe.
Merci. D'abord, merci au ministre.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the Minister and his colleagues for coming to this meeting today. It's a pleasure for us to have you. I'd like to put you a question about the Canadian Institute for Citizenship and the funding that is allocated for the expenditure on the part of this institute. There will be a reallocation of resources as a result of grants of $1 million in funding for this institute in order to encourage dialogue at the international level and to increase awareness about Canadian citizenship. I would like you to explain to us briefly, since we do have a limited time, what exactly you are attempting to do. What does this mean, stimulating dialogue at the national level? We entered into this agreement with the Canadian Citizenship Institute. It's been in effect since 2006, and the amount that you see indicated here reflects the last year of funding as part of this agreement. And we do appreciate a great deal the work being done by the Institute that promotes citizenship in Canada. And basically it is the only group that is engaged in this work, as far as I know. The only institution that is devoted to promoting Canadian citizenship within Canada. And this is something that they are doing by bringing together groups that reflect on what the implications of Canadian citizenship are and how the feeling of belonging can be transmitted to immigrants who come to Canada. And in our view, they have acquired a very useful expertise, and we are proud to have given them funding. When it comes to the future, I can say that, personally speaking, I'm certainly very much interested in the possibility of providing funding to institutions in Canada that are engaged in promoting Canadian citizenship. I think that it's an important activity. Respecting our financial constraints, of course. Thank you. I'd like to continue my question. Why is it not CIC that looks after this task rather than the Institute? Does this not produce the accountability to Canadians on what is being done? No, they are certainly accountable to us for their activities. They come under an agreement with us, and we are very much aware of what is being done by this Institute. Like as is the case for all institutes that we provide funding to, up to $500 million, $500 to $600 million a year, and accountability is very much an important factor. Could we have a report on their activities in the recent past? They do provide an annual report, and it will be possible to send it to the committee. So you can send it to the committee clerk, I gather. Yes. And I'd simply like to add that our funding is added to the funding from the private sector that they attempt to raise by themselves. So it's solely a part of their funding. They engage in fundraising activity. As their mission is described as stimulating dialogue at a national level, I'd be curious to know whether this is aimed at finding out the opinions of Canadian citizens on the reform of citizenship, this effort that was undertaken recently. Would this be one of the areas that they might be interested in? They are certainly welcome to work with you, and you are quite you are able to attend their activities. But my question is whether the Institute might take part in improving the reform of citizenship. Yes, it would be possible. I don't know whether they intend to become involved directly in activities related to our bill, but I would say that our bill is based in part on the work that they have done and the work done by various other Excuse me, I have so many other questions. I'd like to turn now to the Immigrant Investor Program. We heard in the media recently that people intended to start legal action because of the fact that their applications were shut down. I'd like to know whether you've set aside any money as part of this possible court action. Unfortunately, and quite inevitably, I think, we do face different types of litigation over the years. And you have set aside money? There are all sorts of possible motivations for litigation. Excuse me for cutting you off, Minister, but I'd simply like to know whether you have set aside any amount of money in relation to these possible legal actions. Yes, we take into account any possible legal implications. So it's provided for in your estimates. Yes, certainly. And we do have a budget with the Department of Justice in order to manage any type of litigation. And when it comes to refunding the applicants, I'd like to know whether you have provided money for this. Yes. It is not to be found in the document that you have before you, but it will be included in the future documents. In which documents? It will be included in our plans for 2014-15. And quite quickly then, when it comes to the reduction, and it will take us, of course, several years. When it comes to the reduction of operating expenditures of approximately $14 million, in view of the fact that a new program that was under the responsibility of Foreign Affairs and Trade Development, we see that there is a reduction in the operating expenditures, and you could perhaps confirm that this is the case. How can we expect the department to take on more responsibilities with a reduced operating budget? The same service, transfer of responsibility. This is the trend is on the upswing. With the same financial resources, the funding will remain the same. It's simply a matter of transfers among the departments, interdepartmental transfer to reflect their new responsibilities.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome to the Minister and the officials. I'd like to focus on the citizenship program, and beginning with your chart, which shows a mushrooming of processing times from 15 months to 31 months over the last 7 years, accompanied by a statement in your document, quote, as resources for processing these applications have not kept pace, backlogs have developed over those 7 years. And then there's a commitment to more funds, which is the main reason why you allege that the processing times will come down. So in Budget 2013, the government committed $44 million over 2 years to this program. And since the program was only $46 million to begin with, that's a doubling of the program over 2 years, so that may have an impact. And the commitment was for $20 million extra dollars in 2013-14 and $23 million in 2014-15. So imagine my surprise when I looked at the estimates and I found that instead of $20 million extra dollars in 2013-14, there were $0 extra dollars in 2013-14, nothing at all. So rather than reducing times, there was nothing at all spent where $20 million was committed. And then if you look at the estimates for next year, one finds that the full amount, $44 million or so, instead of being spread over 2013-14, was included in the single year 2014-15. So instead of doing it over 2 years, 20 million, 23, nothing was done in year 1. All of it was put in year 2. And so the problem with that, Mr. Chair, is first of all, why was nothing put into the program when the budget promised it would be in 2013-14? Second, how can you possibly want us to believe that you can double the program in a single year? And finally, is it not a little bit suspicious that we will not know whether this $44 million extra dollars in 2014-15 is actually spent until after the next election? So there's no pre-election accountability to whether or not you actually spend this money, which is absolutely central to your promises to reduce processing times.
Thank you, Chair, and I thank Mr. McCallum for his question. Just because there aren't changes in the estimates or the supplementary estimates doesn't mean that additional resources aren't being spent. And we have been able to fund increased resources for the citizenship program internally this year, and we will use the full amount of increased resources made available to us next year to continue that ramp up in our processing capacity. Now, yes, there is a backlog that we wish was not there and a waiting time that we wish was not there, partly because of unprecedented demand for citizenship, partly because of the need to review in a serious way residency questions relating to thousands of people. And as you know, there are thousands of such investigations underway. But can I give you the answer to your question, though?
Well, I think you've given enough.
Unlike the Liberal Party, we don't believe that money solves all problems. We need a more efficient model.
Listen,
we need a better decision-making model, and that's why we're backing Bill C-24's Strengthening Canadian Citizenship Act.
Before we get to the point of order, I have a problem. You're both talking at the same time, and these translators will never get it. Point of order, Mr. Menegakis.
Mr. Chair, if the member asks a question, he should allow the time for the minister to respond to the question. It's just courtesy.
I know.
And that's not, we can't have this going back and forth, as you've already noted.
It's a reasonable point of order, although I guess Mr. McCallum is concerned about he hasn't much time.
Exactly.
We'll let Mr. Alexander try to be brief. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Minister.
Well, the much more important impact on this backlog will come with the passage of the legislation, and as a demonstration of the fact that we are ramping up and moving through more applications even before the new spending comes on stream, 40,000 new citizenship was awarded to 40,000 new Canadians in the months of January and February. That is an absolutely unprecedented rate, I think, for all time, and it shows that we're ramping up.
It does not, however, because whereas the budget committed to a 50% increase in the budget, according to the estimates, it's zero. And so I don't understand, if the estimates give you the room, why you don't take that room. I do not understand why the bulk of the increase is occurring in the next year, when Canadians will not know whether that money has actually been spent until after the election. And you give all sorts of reasons for why this processing time has gone up, but in your own document you say the reason is, quote, as resources for processing these applications have not kept pace. Your own department says it's a resource issue. You have not put the resources in over the last 7 years. Now, having promised you would put them in 2013-14, the estimates say zero instead of 20 million.
We're at our limit, so...
And you want us to believe after the election that you will have spent the money, none of which, according to the estimates, you've spent.
I don't know. Can you give a 30-second
Mr.
answer?
Chair, if I may, on behalf of the Minister, just indicate that in fact, we are investing internally. It's a question of staffing positions. A lot of this processing requires people, and we have launched very significant staffing processes. In fact, we're already bringing on board several hundred employees, and that process, in terms of just government public service processes, actually takes many months. So we will actually have many more positions on stream that will actually deal with processing. We already have people coming on stream now. So we will see the bulk of these actual...
We have to stop. I'm sorry. Mr. Lung.
Thank you, Chair.
Give her a chance to finish.
Actually, Ms. Anita, I just will allow you a little time to finish your comment. I think there's merit to what you're, how you're responding.
If I can just complete that, Mr. Chair, it takes time to staff positions. A lot of the workload requires resources in terms of being able to process at the same time that we are trying to re-engineer our processes to make sure they're as efficient as possible. As the Minister mentioned, the change to the new decision-maker model will actually have a significant impact as well in our processing capacity. Although the budget funding that was identified over 2 years, we actually have internally allocated resources this year in terms of meeting our needs, but the bulk of our requirements will actually be reflected in 14-15 because it will be a question of just reprofiling resources that will actually meet our requirements in the next year. So it may not necessarily match what we may have seen originally in the original budget documents, but in fact we will be in fact spending those resources, and a lot of it will be associated with staffing processes that will be completed certainly for 14-15.
Mr. Chair, so at this time I'd like to table these two documents, which I'm sure Mr. McCallum has, but I see that he may not have it in Technicolor. It's called Strengthening Canadian Citizenship, Shortening Processing Time. If you look at, you don't have it in Technicolor, but you know. Sorry?
It is in color.
Oh, okay. This one is in color, and what it shows is that as
Stop the clock for a minute. Everybody's got one except this end of the table. Or the opposition.
Or the official opposition.
Said he's tabling.
I'm tabling it. Yeah.
Giving evidence. Is that okay?
Oh, don't you worry.
Table. The point I wish to make is...
Point of order, Mr. Chair?
No,
okay,
I need to
done
consult
yours.
with the clerk.
Yes.
Just a second. It's a little unusual, Mr. If you give the clerk a copy, she will send an electronic version tomorrow. A little unusual for you to give evidence as opposed to this end of the table giving evidence.
I understand.
So, but you can table it, but
Okay.
The members may not see it till tomorrow.
That's fine. I think it is in
We're going to start the clock again.
Yes, sir. The point I wish to make is
Point
that
of order now, Mr. Chair?
what
I'm
this
sorry.
indicates...
Hold on again. Stop the clock. You have another point of order?
I just wanted to make sure that the documents are in both official languages.
I don't even know what the document is at this stage, but if it is, if it requires that, it'll be in both official languages.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I mean, I haven't seen it, you haven't seen it, so we'll wait and see.
Thank
It'll
you,
be a
Mr. Chair.
surprise.
Thank you.
You continue, Mr. Lung.
It's full of surprises.
Indeed.
The point I wish to
Start the
make is
clock
that
again.
when you look at the current situation where we're going to 2013, 2014, we're staying what the status quo is. And there are 3 lines here. If we either stay on the status quo, you'll see that the processing time will increase. You'll also see that if we apply the human resources, the financial resources to it, you will then notice that it will decrease the processing time. And if we go to the new model of, there are a lot of times efficiency can be achieved through changing the way we do things. And that is what the Economic Action Plan line shows, that we will even reduce that quite dramatically. So therefore, you have been in business, and you very well know that not everything is achieved by throwing more money away at solving the problem. So that's why, I mean, people could get more experience in what they do. I mean, as the Deputy Minister mentioned, that as they get trained.
Mr. Long, before we get into a debate here, just please direct your comments to the chair.
Yes, sir. Okay, that's my comment, sir.
That's it?
Yeah, that's it. Right.
You're finished.
I am finished.
Then we'll move to the next round, which is Mr. Sandhu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the witnesses for being here today. Question for the Minister. In April 2012, the federal government announced it would resume the management of settlement programs funded by the federal government in British Columbia and Manitoba, so that these programs were aligned with those of other provinces except for Quebec, outside of Quebec. These supplementary estimates show that reallocation of money from operating expenses to fund a grant of approximately $4.5 million for direct management or settlement support services in British Columbia and Manitoba. However, I met with a number of service providers and also met with the local university English language program administrators. And they're worried about not knowing what their funding will be in the coming year. Can you tell us when that's going to be done?
Sure. The transfer takes place as of April the 1st. We had, as you know, starting last summer, a very painstaking and careful call for proposals and review of proposals in consultation with the province to make sure that there was as much continuity as possible and as much sharing of expertise and knowledge about the specific challenges of British Columbia and delivering service. I think it's safe to say that not every organization that was funded by the British Columbia government before this transfer will be funded by us, nor will each one of them be funded at the same level. That is normal. That reflects our practice in every province where we provide settlement services. We're trying to get the best result for newcomers to Canada on the basis of this unprecedented funding that has grown threefold and almost fourfold in the case of BC since 2006.
Thank you.
So one of the focuses is language training, but there are lots of other focuses.
Okay. In a press release announcing the federal government's in a press release announcing that the federal government would resume management of programs funded by the federal government in British Columbia, the minister at that time, Mr. Kenny, at the time, also assured these agencies that, and I quote this change will have no impact on the amount allocated to the basic settlement services. Yet these organizations inform me that while the budget of British Columbia for settlement service was $210 million in 2013, it was lowered this year to provide only $100 million. So why is the promise made by Mr. Kenny not kept?
It was never $210,000 federal funding for settlement to British Columbia, not even close to that. So I'm not sure where you're getting that number from. We spend roughly $900 billion on settlement services across the country, $300 of it for Quebec, $600 for the rest of the provinces, of which for British Columbia, my colleagues will tell me it's a much smaller number than $200 million. But our funding, now federally delivered, is on the same order of magnitude as it was when delivered by British Columbia. We decide on how much funding goes to each province on the basis of the proportion of immigrants settling in that province. It's not any kind of a formula or arbitrary decision that we take. It's based on objective data about where newcomers are settling in this country, and so it goes up and down. I can tell you that the share spent in Ontario has tended to go down in recent years as the proportion of newcomers going to other provinces, almost all other provinces, but especially Western Canadian provinces, has gone up.
Minister, you mentioned in your speaking notes here that you've inherited a broken system from the previous government, and wait times were up to 8 years. And I'm looking at our Canadian immigration website right now. For parents, to sponsor parents, it takes 45 months to process the application in Canada. In addition to that, it takes up to anywhere from 56 months. For New Delhi, 61 months. So according to my math, that's 8 years and 10 months. You've had 8 years to clean up their mess. Are you allocating any additional funds to get rid of this backlog?
We're very proud of the fact that in only 3 years, by the end of 2014, we will have admitted under the Action Plan for Faster Family Unification 75,000 parents and grandparents. That's a higher rate than ever before in Canadian history. We're also proud of the fact that a very large backlog that would be on the way to being 200,000, 250,000 for parents and grandparents is now down to 86,000. At the end of last year, we took in 5,000 new applications. That puts it around 90,000. We're taking in 20,000 parents and grandparents this year. That translates into a time, Mr. Senator, by simple math, that is much less than 8 or 9 years. It's actually, when you take into account abandoned applications, inadmissible applications, it takes it down to around 4 years. That's a huge improvement on the mess that the Liberals made us.
Sorry, Mr. Sandu, we're over time. Mr. Opitz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will be splitting my time with Mr. Komarnitsky. Minister, thank you, and for you and your staff for being here today. I've been involved in this since I worked for Jason Kenney at one time and watched many of these new reforms come in, which has absolutely, I think, made our government and country proud by being able to offer very flexible ways for people to either visit this country or come stay in this country or rejoin their families in this country. We've redistributed how immigration is allocated, as you just mentioned, Minister, across the country, and how those funds are redistributed to recognize that redistribution, and of course the targeting as we do for francophones. We are part of the francophonie, and I think that we have an obligation to, of course, work within that construct and develop those abilities that we have. And I've got lists and lists in front of me of our accomplishments in the last few years, which have been absolutely unprecedented. But just a quick question. We're moving money from contributions to grants and to the Institute for Canadian Citizenship in order to, of course, encourage national dialogue around and build awareness for Canadian citizenship, as we've already done in so many ways with our products. What other programs does the Institute for Canadian Citizenship run that you can tell us about?
Well, they run programs that I would call them programs of inquiry into what citizenship means to Canadians in the 21st century, what being a citizen means to a Canadian today. We know a lot of people attach importance to their citizenship as an expression of their freedom, their personal freedom, our freedom as a country. We know that a lot of people attach importance to the history of Canada, which we're still discovering. We just passed Black History Month. I don't think any of us around the table could count ourselves as probably as fully knowledgeable about the history of Black Canadians as we would like to be. And through the promotion of Canadian citizenship that this institute does, we are bringing that history back to life. They played a role in helping us design the Discover Canada Guide. And they do fantastic work promoting citizenship, helping us to design the citizenship ceremonies, make them as meaningful as possible, associate them with different institutions in Canada that magnify the meaning that we all sense and the emotion we all sense in those ceremonies. Had the opportunity to be on the ice at what's it called now? The Scotiabank Centre. Canadian Tire Centre, thank you. Changes so often. Here in Ottawa, in Canada, for a Senators game where the new Canadians were on the ice singing, thanks to an initiative of Canadian Tire. That's the kind of innovation that's happening under the auspices of the Institute and in partnership with us.
It's absolutely foundational. I'm going to turn over to Mr. Komarnitsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have some time then.
2 minutes.
Minute and a half.
Okay, thank you very much. Obviously, in Saskatchewan, with the economy doing very well, there's been a fair amount of immigration, and there have been settlement funds for settlement and integration. I think it's very important that those types of funds are allocated and are allocated in accordance with some flexibility as the need grows. But in Quebec, I understand through a particular funding formula that you have, a certain amount goes to support settlement and integration services as well. Now, it would be interesting, and perhaps you could share with us, if there has been a comparative study undertaken with respect to the types of services that are provided in Quebec compared to the rest of Canada, whether there are some best practices we can adopt from the practices in Quebec or vice versa, and what progress is being made in that regard, what steps are being taken. Maybe you can just illuminate that part of it for us.
Sure. No, it's a very interesting question, and I think we're all impressed. I haven't visited that many of them because they are delivered by the Quebec government. They're not managed by us. Settlement service organizations in Quebec, but I think we're all impressed by the quality of the work that many of them do. And we do, as a department, try and bring settlement organizations together to share best practices. We had a conference that I had the opportunity to speak at in November, certainly this past fall, where Quebec was represented, and where it was very clear that there's a level of expertise in certain areas in Quebec that other provinces don't necessarily have. I would underline how generous the provisions of the Canada-Quebec Accord are. It dates from 1991, but unlike the funding for the other provinces,
we have to move on.
It cannot go down. There is a clause in the Accord that means the number must remain stable, or if numbers justify, go up.
Mr. Daniel, you got 4.5 minutes.
Okay. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here. Let me first begin by congratulating your department for reducing the wait times on some of the citizenship issues and the continuing work that you're doing on that. But my question is, I can't help noticing how non-governmental organizations are preaching how important it is to strengthen the value of the Canadian citizenship. I know when we debated Bill C-24 last week in the House of Commons, the members opposite said they would not support the bill. Can you tell me, in the light of us voting on giving these funds to the Institute of the Canadian Citizenship, how exactly Bill C-24 will strengthen the value of Canadian citizenships?
Thank you, Mr. Daniel, for that question. And I do think it's a very exciting time for Canadian citizenship, not just because of gold medals in hockey at Sochi and other achievements of which we are justifiably proud. We are making progress in delivering citizenship better. 41,000 awards of citizenship in just 2 months. That puts us on a pace to, if we kept it up, do 240,000 this year, which would be well beyond what we've ever done in the past. I don't expect that, by the way, but it's a great way to begin the year, and it certainly has us on a pace to beat last year and the year before, even before the provisions of the new Act come into play, which will make us more efficient and more productive on the citizenship front. I should mention, in talking about the Institute for Canadian Citizenship, there's one great initiative that I didn't mention, which is their Cultural Access Pass, which allows newcomers to Canada to go to this huge number of cultural attractions and national parks across the country that most of us have not visited. And it's a great way to open their imaginations and minds to the scale of this country and its history. But what are we doing in this bill to strengthen Canadian citizenship? I think it really comes down to two things. One, taking a solemn commitment from every applicant to be a citizen that they are going to reside here, that they are going to meet the terms required to become a citizen. And we're going to do that in a way that is verifiable now. That's exciting because it's going to make the rules clearer, more understandable, and equal for everyone. There won't be ways of jumping the queue or getting around the rules. And secondly, we're going to make sure that there is this deeper connection, this sense of attachment and belonging to Canada. It used to be 5 years, under successive Liberal governments up until the 1970s. Then it went down to 3 years, and we had a certain number of people who weren't even here for the 3 years. And nevertheless became Canadian citizens. Now we're saying it's going to be 4 years out of 6. That's flexibility that reflects the global lives that many people are leaving. But it's going to emphasize to newcomers to Canada that there is no substitute for direct experience of our country. And 4 years of that experience we think is enough to create the connection that leads to strong citizenship. And I have to say we're very pleased by the reaction we've had, first and foremost, from newcomers, from new Canadians themselves, saying this is what they want to see. Canadian citizenship has value. No one's going to protect it, the value of our citizenship, if we don't do that ourselves, especially we as legislators in this committee and in the Parliament of Canada.
Time?
Well, very brief.
Very brief. Obviously, being a citizen means getting passports, and we've noticed the transfer of the passport responsibility from Foreign Affairs and Trade Development to Citizenship and Immigration. Can you speak to the success of the e-passport and the 10-year passport, and how many have been issued since their creation?
Yes, I certainly can. I think this is a very good news story, a great news story for the Government of Canada. The changes started when it was still part of Foreign Affairs. We are delivering them, I think, faster and better than ever. And this new e-passport that was launched in July of 2013 has beaten all the records for previous Canadian passports. More have been issued faster than ever before, and I think it was something like 3.5 million in the second half, in 5 months of last year. Why? It's more secure. It's a 10-year passport, so per annum it costs less, and people are proud of their passports, want to have it, whether they travel to the United States or further afield.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Ms. Blanchette-Lamoth, you have a very brief question. Time.
Merci. Alors, je voudrais...
Thank you. I'd like to have a question with a yes or no answer. Can you confirm that there has been a reduction in the operating expenditures announced on page 219 of more than $14 million? You're referring to which statute? I'm referring to 1C. These are transfers from one vote to another. We do have resources that were not used this year. We weren't able to use this year for certain purposes, and were transferred to other purposes to be used in other votes. And I explained to you under what heading they were available and for which purposes they were transferred. But the details can be found here. Thank you.
And explaining some of the issues of immigration and citizenship. Until the next time, we will suspend. Thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, our time is it's a wasting. So we're going to start. Can I have some order, please? I'm going to start the second part of our meeting, which is continuation of our study of the strengthening the position of women in our immigration system. We have three witnesses before us. We have Helen Newfield, who is a representative of the Canadian Council for Refugees. I don't see her tag, but I assume she's the one without the tag.
Printed because it's Heather Newfeld. There was a mistake.
Heather.
Where's mine? Yes.
I'm sorry, Heather.
That's okay.
Heather Newfield. I will correct that. Thank you very much.
I appreciate it.
And we also have two lawyers. Chantal Deloge.
Yes, I am.
Good afternoon to you. You are with Chantal Deloge Professional Corporation.
That's right.
And Julie Taube, who has been here before.
Yes.
She is an immigration and refugee lawyer and a former member of the Immigration and Refugee Board of Canada. It's good to see you again and help us with this report. So, Heather Newfield, you're first.
All right. And I am an immigration and refugee lawyer here in
Everybody's
Ottawa
a lawyer here.
at South Ottawa
good.
Community Legal Services. So as I'm sure you probably know, in October 2012, Canada implemented a new conditional permanent residence regime for certain sponsored spouses and partners. And that's for anyone whose sponsorship was submitted after the 25th of October 2012. And the first 2 years of the person's sponsorship will be conditional if they have been married or lived common law with their sponsor for less than 2 years before that sponsorship, and they have no children in common. So under the new law, if the sponsored person does not remain cohabiting in that conjugal relationship for the first 2 years, the conditional period, then their permanent residence may be revoked and they may find themselves at risk of deportation. Now, the government has enacted 2 exceptions to that conditional permanent residence for people that it would normally affect, and that is for people whose sponsor dies during the conditional period, or for people who are subjected to domestic violence by their sponsor or someone related to their sponsor during that 2-year period. So my emphasis today is going to be on the domestic violence exemption during the 2-year conditional period. And although we applaud the government for creating the domestic violence exemption, there's more that needs to be done to make it practically, meaningfully accessible to women in the situation that need to access that domestic violence exemption. So first I'm going to mention a few of the vulnerabilities of the women who may find themselves in that situation needing to access the exemption. And then I'm going to talk about a few of the practical examples of how implementation of the exemption needs to be improved and some of the barriers that we're seeing already. Now, this is a very new procedure, and given that it only applies to sponsorships that have been submitted after the 25th of October 2012, we haven't seen tons of cases yet, but we have seen some that are starting to give us a picture already of what's happening. I'd like to note that 59% of sponsored spouses are women. That's the most recent statistics that we were able to access from 2012. And it's important to consider situations of domestic violence because in the conditional permanent residence system, the conditionality of the 2-year period gives an abusive sponsor an extra tool, an extra type of power that he can hold over the woman. And I'm saying he and woman because in the majority of these situations I'm talking about a male sponsor and a female sponsored person. Now, it could be a same-sex relationship or it could be reversed as well. So the sponsor is able to hold over the woman that basically if she doesn't obey, if she doesn't put up with domestic violence and she leaves before the 2 years are up, she can find herself without status. He can also split up with her and cause her to not have status, or he can make tips to immigration saying that she entered into the marriage fraudulently, even if she didn't. So what are some of the barriers that these women face who are experiencing domestic violence? I'm sure you've heard many of them before, everything from language barriers to isolation and not knowing about their options for help, to not having financial resources, fear of homelessness, lack of a support network in Canada, being afraid of the police and the authorities here, because in many countries the police are organs of repression themselves, and as well fear of leaving the abusive sponsor because that may also affect their children. If a mother arrives with conditional permanent residence, she has children that aren't children that she's had with her sponsor, but children from a previous relationship that she's brought with her. If she doesn't stay in the conditional situation for 2 years, the children's status is also at risk. So given this situation, given the vulnerability of women that are experiencing domestic violence, this makes it crucial that the exemption for women to be able to come forward to CIC and say, I'm in a domestic violence situation, I need to be exempted from fulfilling the 2-year conditional period, it's important that that exemption is really functional for women. And so I'm going to mention just 4 points of things that are problems that we're seeing or things that we think can be improved. The first is having a designated CIC phone number that's actually staffed by a real person. And that may seem self-evident, but if you've ever tried to call the CIC call center, as we have many, many times, usually you don't reach anyone, or you stay online for a very long time and then the phone hangs up on you. Now, if a woman is in a domestic violence situation and she needs to call CIC, explain her situation, often she's not able to stay by a phone for hours to keep trying to call. Even if she does reach an agent at the CIC call center, she then has to be transferred to another department and an officer has to call her back. Again, this is a problem because there isn't necessarily a number where the woman can be called back all the time. Women need to be able to access a phone number where they can reach a person who can actually initiate the process with them. As well, it would be helpful, particularly for non-government organizations and lawyers who are assisting these women, to be able to submit an exemption request either electronically or by mail rather than having to do everything only by phone, which is currently the only permitted option. So we're aware of cases, for example, such as one where a woman has been calling CIC since November. Even when her case gets transferred to the Client Relations Department, there's no voicemail at that department. She doesn't reach someone. Someone eventually calls her back, but she's not there, and so they've just gone in circles since November. So it's important that they can reach someone. A second issue is the need for telephone interpretation. A lot of women do not have strong enough English or French, particularly if they've just recently arrived, and CIC would be very helpful if they could provide telephone interpretation in these kinds of circumstances, much as Legal Aid Ontario does with their 1-800 number for requesting legal aid certificates. You know, it's a model that exists with other organizations and would be extremely helpful so that women can speak directly to the CIC agent themselves. The third issue is better training for CIC officers. Currently, we're seeing issues like officers, despite there being an operational bulletin on the domestic violence exemption, not being aware of the correct information and saying that they don't know the procedure, or that a woman has to wait the 2 years of conditional permanent residence before she can apply, or saying that they can't talk to a woman who's using an interpreter because the interpreter is not an authorized representative.
You have 1 minute, Ms. Neufeld. Thank you.
Problems like that. And then the last issue that I would mention is the need for information sessions for both sponsors and sponsored spouses when they enter Canada to make them aware of what are their rights and responsibilities under Canadian law, so that women who need to access the domestic violence exemption in the future are aware that that exemption exists. I will just say very, very quickly, another problem that we're seeing is women who are in the sponsorship process. The sponsorship is withdrawn while it's in process, and the woman who is experiencing domestic violence finds herself without an approved sponsorship and without a route to permanent residence. The humanitarian and compassionate process is ill-suited to deal with those cases. You know, I'd be happy to respond to that more in questions later, but we need a process where women whose sponsorship has broken down through no fault of their own to have a process by which they can independently gain permanent residence.
Thank you, Ms. Neufeld. Ms. Desloges.
Thank you very much. I've been doing immigration for about 20 years, and I'm a certified specialist in immigration and refugee law. I'm not an expert in violence against women, so I'm going to limit my comments today to things that I've seen on the ground in my practice as a lawyer, real-life examples, and things that I've actually observed personally. From my observation, the issue of violence against women in the immigration system has many causes, but it breeds on two factors. First of all, a lack of information and education initially by women who are immigrating to Canada, and second, a situation of isolation in which they find themselves after they immigrate to Canada, which keeps them in a powerless position of being unable to learn about their rights. From thousands of spousal sponsorships that I've handled personally, I see the solutions in the immigration context as being divided into two separate factors. First of all, what can we do before the woman arrives in Canada to ensure that she is arriving in the best possible conditions to be able to understand what her rights are? The second is what can we do after she arrives in terms of integration and settlement into the community so that even if she doesn't know her rights before she gets here, she will at least somehow learn about them after she arrives. With the sponsorship process itself, there are some gaps which I think could be addressed, some of them through regulatory revision and some of them through simple procedural changes. The first one is sponsorship eligibility. Under our current system, a sponsor must be 18 years old in order to sponsor a spouse. However, the sponsored applicant, the person who is overseas, need only be 16 years old in order to be sponsored as a married person. I see that as problematic. I think that probably the reason it was written that way in the first place is to make it consistent with Canadian law. In most provinces, you have to be 16 in order to legally marry, so that's probably why it was written that way in the first place. But I think there's a strong case to increase the minimum age from 16 to 18 years. I believe that it would disincentivize families overseas from forcing their younger daughters to marry so early. Why should we distinguish between marriages that take place in other countries compared to marriages that take place in Canada? Well, I believe because Canadians, people who get married in Canada have all of the legal protections of our system. If they enter into an abusive relationship or if they suffer coercion in entering into a marriage, they can access the Canadian legal system in order to take care of that. However, women overseas do not have those rights. I'm not saying that we don't recognize marriages as legal if they occur in another country with a woman who is under 18 years of age, but I think what we should do is not allow that person to be sponsored until they at least reach the age of 18. I believe that faced with the prospect of 2 years, waiting 2 years before sponsorship is allowed to take place, would disincentivize families and allow the girls to mature a little bit and reach the age of 18 before rushing into the marriage. I should state that not all of my colleagues share this view. There have been contrary views expressed to that, specifically that it would end up putting a girl possibly in a worse position, that if she's married when she is 16 and then has to wait 2 years before she can be sponsored, she would certainly be much better protected in Canada compared to outside of Canada. But my view is that it's a good case to increase the age of sponsorship. If I then turn to looking at the specific immigration processes, simple things such as application forms and application kits can really, making amendments to those could really go a long way. For example, what I often see in my practice is that the young couple is not filling up their application forms and making their sponsorship applications on their own. It is usually an elder family member, either a father or an uncle or a brother, who is doing this on their behalf. The problem is that oftentimes the young couple does not understand what has been written in the application and does not understand what they're signing. They may not even have been permitted to read those application forms before they signed. I believe that the application form should be amended to have two different spaces on them. First of all, a space that allows someone to write down if they had an interpreter who interpreted the contents of that application form to them in their own language. The second space should be for disclosing whether you had someone assist you with preparing those application forms or if someone prepared those application forms on your behalf. It's not going to be a foolproof solution, but at minimum, it's better than the system we have now, where someone who doesn't speak English at all signs the application form stating that the contents are true and correct and has no real way of knowing exactly what they've attested to in those application forms. It also allows some accountability later that someone's signature is there as an interpreter, and if they did not interpret those forms, it gives someone to go back to say, look, why didn't you do that? When it comes to consideration of the application, currently many applications are processed without the need for a personal interview. In those cases where a personal interview is required, only the foreign national is required to attend that interview, and the sponsor is not. In fact, most of the time, the sponsor is never heard from by the visa officer who's making a decision on the application. And I think ideally it would be better to insist on some form of contact with both parties. That does not have to be necessarily a personal interview. It could be something as simple as a phone call to establish contact and to make sure that there is no situation of coercion or abuse that's taking place. Someone to speak directly, particularly to the female in the situation, alone in isolation without someone being there with her to make sure that coercion is not taking place. The problem that I have, though, is that my issue is that what do you do in the system if a visa officer does discover that the woman in front of her is being coerced or abused? How to handle that situation? Because surely the solution cannot be to send the girl back to her family in shame with a refusal letter stating that she disclosed the abuse to the visa officer. What I think should be on the table for consideration is that in a situation like that, an officer might consider applying humanitarian and compassionate consideration to that case as a matter of routine. Not to say that it necessarily has to be successful in every case, but I think an officer should look at it to see if that might be a possible solution to allow the girl to immigrate to Canada without necessarily having the sponsorship hanging over her head in an abusive situation. And incidentally, I agree completely with the comments of my friend Ms. Neufeld on her comments about the conditional permanent residence. Those domestic violence guidelines really need to be clarified. Finally, the one last recommendation I wanted to make is that there should be a sponsorship bar for women who have come to Canada, claimed refugee status on grounds of domestic violence, been accepted, and then turning around later, a couple of years later, and wanting to sponsor the husband who abused her. Not as a punishment to the woman, but as a means of protecting her. I have seen personally several cases of this happening where the women come under incredible family pressure to forgive the abuser and to sponsor him to Canada. I believe that putting a legal barrier to her doing so would relieve her of that obligation and would relieve her of that family pressure to sponsor someone that she probably really doesn't want to sponsor in the first place. And I'll confine my comments to that because I think I'm out of time.
Ms. Taube, welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me back. I'm coming at this a little bit differently. My background is an immigration and refugee protection lawyer. I've done hundreds, maybe well over 1,000 spousal sponsorships, but thousands have come to me, and I routinely turn down about 20% if I have any indication of any feeling that this might be a marriage of convenience. And Chantal and I went to federal court on this issue, marriages of convenience, back in 2008, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. So I'm looking at it from that perspective. We found at that time of the 500 victims of marriage of convenience, the majority were immigrants themselves. And they were the sponsors who were duped. And virtually they have no recourse, and to this date they have no recourse. And many of them, perhaps a majority of these duped immigrant sponsors, were women. And although they made written complaints to CBSA, and although they made complaints to CIC that they had been duped, that is, their spouse, their sponsored spouse, arrives in Canada and is gone within a few days, within a few months, there's no recourse. CBSA and CIC does not have the personnel, does not have the means to deal with these allegations. So there is a subgroup of immigrant women who have been abused, and really abused. They may be thereafter stuck with enormous debt to pay back social services if their spouse or their former spouse decides to go on welfare within the 3 years of their financial obligation. They may have to hire a family lawyer if the spouse goes after them in family court for support or division of property. So there's one category of immigrant women who do suffer abuse from another point of view that I would like to bring to your attention as well, because they seem to be left out of this whole equation of abused immigrant women. Now, before I came here, I did a consultation with the criminal law firm of Adelman Bow Gilbert in Ottawa. Richard Adelman, the senior lawyer, has been a criminal lawyer since 1970s. So, on a report of abuse, domestic abuse, as you all know, is not necessarily a real case of abuse. And as they explained to me, there are thousands upon thousands of false allegations of domestic abuse made, particularly in separation cases, divorce cases, custody cases. However, all the spouse has to say is that he abused me. Yesterday, last year, whenever, the Crown has no discretion. They must arrest the accused. They must take him down to the police station. They must proceed with trial, even if the Crown knows, even if both are aware there's hardly any evidence or it will not stand. They must proceed to trial. Now, with this new loophole, just because a sponsored spouse says she's been abused, unless it's clearly evident, until there is a trial, how do we know that it's not a false allegation of abuse simply to get around the new conditional residency requirement? How do we know how many of these cases are false allegations where a Canadian sponsor will have to hire a criminal lawyer, will have to go to trial, and by the way, it takes a minimum of 1 year to go to trial, and there's absolutely no consequences for false allegations, nothing. A judge can tear into the complainant during the criminal trial and tear her testimony to pieces. She will not be charged with perjury. She will not be charged with anything. But a sponsor who was falsely accused of domestic abuse because a sponsored spouse doesn't feel like hanging around for 2 years and just wants to become a permanent resident, he has to hire a criminal lawyer, his life is destroyed, and it goes on for a year. Now, I am speaking firsthand of one of my cases, at which I'll be testifying at a criminal trial. I helped a female immigrant, a failed refugee claimant from one of the Scandinavian countries. She came to me when there was a removal order in place against her. I wasn't involved with her refugee claim. She came to me to stop the removal order. She had 2 children, and she had sort of joint custody with her Canadian husband, who had withdrawn the sponsorship, and there were allegations of abuse. I succeeded, for various reasons, to stop this removal order. And she would disappear for 6 or 7 months at a time. She was having a lot of emotional issues and breakdowns. 2 years later, that is in 2012, she came back to me after an absence about a year with a new Canadian husband and another child to do an in-Canada spousal sponsorship. And I was really happy for her. And I did, and I proceeded, and we did it. Everything got going. I submitted it. And then January 2013, I get an email from her, okay, at a particular date stating, I'm just terrible at choosing husbands. My marriage has broken down. As usual, I picked the wrong man, something to that effect, and he's been abusive, but not physically. He won't give me money to spend as I wish, something like that, psychologically abusive. 2 days later, I get a call from the husband. These are, joint clients I had in the past. Marriage has failed. I've taken our child, and she's had another breakdown, and we just can't continue. And what am I supposed to do? What are my rights? I said, well, if you're no longer together, just withdraw the spousal sponsorship. I imagine that's what he did, because a week later, I get another email from her stating she had been sexually assaulted by her husband on a date previous to her first email. So clearly, when she's in a position that there's going to be a removal order issued against her, we go from psychological abuse to sexual assault. That's an abuse of the system, and I'm afraid that might happen in these cases. Just because someone says they've been a victim of domestic abuse, unless it's clearly evident, until you go to trial, you really don't know. Just like someone says, I'm a refugee claimant, till they've had their hearing, we don't know if they really are a refugee.
Thank you, Ms. Taube, and thank you to all of you. You're all three of you are experienced counsel, and we appreciate you coming and raising the issues of conflict that we're going to have to look at. Mr. Menengakis has some questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank all three of our witnesses for appearing before us today, and I feel compelled to say how insightful I found all three of your testimonies. This is obviously a very important study. It brings up some emotions in most human beings when we're dealing with abuse of women in particular, and especially people that are attempting to use our immigration streams to promote their illicit intentions towards their spouses or spouses-to-be. I'm going to start my questions with you, Madame Deloge, if I may. Have you had women come to you complaining about requests for assistance because they've been involved in a forced marriage situation?
Yes, I have. It happened to me one time. I was approached to do a sponsorship appeal. I was hired by a woman and her family to do a sponsorship appeal. And it came out that the first time I met her alone isolated from her family, she told me that she was being forced to do this, that she had not wanted to marry the person, and that she wanted to find some way to get out of it, but she couldn't let her family know. So it put me in a really, really difficult position, obviously. It ended up I couldn't continue to act because it put me in a conflict of interest as against her husband. But I feel like if this had come up at an earlier time, if someone had spoken to her alone at a much earlier stage than that she might not have come to that position. And that's why I recommended earlier that at some point during the sponsorship process, somebody should speak to the woman and ask her certain probing questions about whether there is coercion or abuse involved.
What steps do you tell them to take? I mean, what advice would you give them if somebody comes and says, I'm in a forced marriage situation? What avenues do you have?
Well, if the person is the sponsor and is in Canada, the first thing I would do is tell them to go to the police. As I said earlier, that people who are in Canada at least have the advantage of taking advantage of our protections that we have here in Canada. The problem is if it's the foreign national, it's a much more difficult situation because there could be family situations. They could be under threat from their own family, from the husband's family. The police in their country might not be particularly helpful. And as a lawyer, my two colleagues here can attest to the same thing, that when you're representing both parties in a sponsorship application or in an appeal, it puts you in a conflict of interest. And then as counsel, you end up having to withdraw, and you can't help either side.
Thank you. Ms. Taube, thank you for sharing the story of the case that you're dealing with. I'm wondering if you've ever encountered anybody involved in a polygamist relationship.
No, I have not. No. I know of them, but there's nothing I can do about it. I would just like to add to Chantal's presentation, I think interviews should be compulsory in all situations where conditional residency would apply. I think they should be compulsory, and I do think that the sponsor should be interviewed if he or she, well, if he is not able to make it to the visa office, then by telephone. There's no question, because you really can't get the real situation on a piece of paper.
I think I may know the answer to this question, but let me ask you this as a follow-up. Are those who face forced marriage situations aware of their rights with respect to forced marriage?
Aware of the rights in Canada?
Yeah. Yes.
I don't believe they're aware of the rights when they're overseas. Once they get here, I think they do become aware of their rights. And in a situation that Chantal just brought up, if in fact the woman is here and there is an appeal and she's been coerced into marriage, I would recommend that she go and retain another immigration lawyer and make a refugee claim. Because being forced into a marriage and then fearful to withdraw from that marriage because of repercussions from your own family, honor killings, which are not unknown even in Canada, I would have recommended go read. Here's a list of other lawyers. Go make a refugee claim.
You know, something struck me when you were testifying. The case, very recent case, I believe it was in the Ottawa area of a lady who sponsored her spouse to come over, and he came over, and within a short period of time, he beat her up. And it ended up he ended up staying in Canada. It's amazing that there's no way to just get rid of somebody like that.
The immigrant. The sponsored spouse husband beat up the sponsor, and yet he could stay in Canada.
And yet he could stay, yeah. It was amazing.
It must have come in under the old system when he was given automatic.
This is now just a number of months ago. It's not like an old case, but it was front page newspaper.
But he must have come in under the old system.
Yeah. Wow.
When he would have been given granted permanent residence status upon arriving in Canada.
Now, have any? Let me ask all three of you. Have any of you? I know you. Ms. Deloge said she hadn't, but you said you didn't, Ms. Stoll, but have Ms. Deloge or Ms. Neufeld dealt with the polygamist relationship situation?
No, I have not. I have.
You have?
Yeah, on a couple of different occasions. The one that stands out in my mind is a situation where a man had two wives. The original wife is sponsorable, which isn't a problem. The second wife, he had children with her, and one of the children was very ill. It was a Canadian-born child. And I was in the sort of unique position of having to request on humanitarian grounds that the second wife be permitted to stay in Canada for the benefit of the child. I'll be frank with you, I don't think there's anything you can do about polygamy. It's legal in a lot of different countries. I don't think the immigration system really has the tools to be able to address anything to do with that situation. I've racked my brains over it personally because I'm not a fan of the practice myself, but I really don't think that there's anything in the immigration system that can be done about it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Itzabis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here. I want to first start off by saying, Ms. Neufeld, you seem like you had a lot to say, and you said you were summarizing some of your suggestions, so maybe if you have your unabridged comments, you could provide them to the clerk for the rest of the committee to read your entire comments that you originally were planning on saying.
Certainly, I'd be happy to. Thank
you so much. I want to start with Ms. Neufeld. You spoke about the broken sponsorship when, if a situation of abuse happens, that the agency is not a real option for the woman. And you said you might have some recommendations to suggest for that. And what were your recommendations for this woman who was a victim of violence?
We have seen many cases, and we actually do a lot of training for other organizations on dealing with cases where, while a sponsorship is in process, there's abuse, and the woman either has to walk away from the sponsorship or the sponsor withdraws the sponsorship as part of the abuse. And the woman's only recourse generally is a humanitarian and compassionate grounds application. As part of that application, she has to show establishment in Canada. And often she's at a point where, particularly due to the domestic violence, she's not in a strong position to show establishment in the financial sense, in the sense of being well integrated. She may have been isolated. She may have been prohibited from taking language courses. In the United States, they have what's called the self-petition procedure for women precisely in that kind of situation. It was authorized under their Violence Against Women Act, which permits women whose sponsorship has broken down or been withdrawn in process to petition for permanent residence on their own behalf, apart from their sponsor, on the basis of the domestic violence that they've experienced in the U.S., and they have to show certain documentation relating to the domestic violence, but it gives them a tool to be able to safely leave that abusive situation and not have to stay in the situation of violence simply to try to obtain their permanent residence. So I would like to see something more along those lines established, rather than women having to resort to the humanitarian procedure, which also does not stop deportation. And given the long processing times right now, a woman is going to be deported far before that application even gets looked at.
Yeah, and I've actually seen multiple cases where they've tried the HNC route and have been removed from the country before the HNC goes through or is actually refused.
Custody issues have been resolved.
Before the custody issues have been resolved. Question regarding, we had witnesses yesterday who said that who suggested that women should receive information on the legal ramifications or the legal options available in Canada, as well as the support networks, support resources that are available in Canada in their first language, whatever their language might be, before they arrive in Canada, or I guess when they walk in at the airport. What are your thoughts on that, Ms. Newfield?
I think optimally that would be excellent. I understand that that does implicate resources in creating that information in a wide variety of languages, but I think it would be hugely beneficial to women to have that available to them. Any chance that we can better reach them is going to be helpful, and the sooner they're able to get out of a situation of violence, if they are in one, that means the sooner they're going to be contributing in terms of working, in terms of having less health issues related to the abuse. So I think overall, even if it requires an expenditure of resources, it would still be in our interest to do so.
Thank you. And my last idea is along the lines of the burden of proof. Because right now, as we understand and how we've been advised by other witnesses, is that the burden of proof for the occurrence of the violence rests with the woman, the abused woman. And in your experience, is it usually easy for them to prove the occurrence of the violence? Instances where there's physical abuse, there are bruises or cuts or burns, that is pretty easy to prove if you've taken a photo of it. My question also goes along the lines of psychological abuse, financial abuse, emotional abuse, all of those. Is it relatively easy for these immigrant women to make these types of attestations or to prove this in a court of law, considering, in your experience? I'll start with Ms. Newfield and then go with Madame Desloges.
No, it's not necessarily easy for them to prove it. They need support. They need people that can assist them in gathering the evidence. They may need to obtain psychological evidence, which may be difficult if they haven't already been in counseling. But all that said, the types of evidence that are currently permitted under the domestic violence exemption around conditional permanent residence list a variety of kinds of proof. What we don't know yet is how many of those will be required in a given case for CIC to accept it. But I would say that I would be strongly opposed to any system that required there be a domestic violence trial with a trial outcome, because there's no certainty that that trial outcome will necessarily correctly prove the abuse. And in many situations, many women are too terrified to ever approach the police. If we put that burden on them, I think the majority of abuse victims will not have actually obtained a domestic violence judgment, and we're far better off if there are a few people who shouldn't have slipped through, rather than having many, many people who we haven't correctly helped.
Do I have more time? Did you want to add in 30 seconds?
Yeah, I was going to. I partially agree with my friend. I think that the only thing I would add to that is that if there has been a trial with a negative trial outcome, I would think that that is innocent until proven guilty. However, I do agree with my friend Ms. Neufeld completely that majority of domestic violence cases do not even go as far as calling the police or going to trial. So in the absence of a trial and a verdict, I would say that, these other types of evidence, they're available, but the problem is unless the woman has an experienced counsel, she's going to have a very difficult time thinking of what to put forward in support of her case. So I think that the guidelines definitely need to be more publicized, and women need to know that even if they don't have a lawyer, what could they possibly present in terms of evidence to be able to prove that kind of a claim.
Thank you. Ms. Sue. Mr. Sue, sorry.
Thank you very much, Chair. And will add my thanks to the witnesses today. My first question, actually, for all of my questions, they're not particularly directed at one witness, but they're inspired by one of the witnesses. So I invite anybody to jump in with an answer. But my first question is related to Ms. Neufeld's statement that Citizenship and Immigration Canada needs to have a real person answer the telephone call. And perhaps provide telephone interpretation for somebody who has suffered abuse or needs to obtain advice. And my question is, has the service level at CIC with respect to this gotten better or worse over time, or what, is the trend in the wrong direction or in the right direction, do you think?
I had been trying to sort of poll other agencies that have had these cases so far around the conditional permanent residence issue and what their experiences have been with getting in touch with CIC. And everyone that I've spoke to has had great difficulty reaching anyone at CIC. And I would say in general, just trying to communicate with CIC at a general level, not even in regard to these domestic violence cases, the wait times are often extremely long on the phone. And often you're just on the phone for a long time, and then you just get a dial tone, and you've got to start over. So.
But is it better than 5 years ago, or worse than 5 years ago? Or is it hard to say? Okay.
Yeah, I think it's probably about the same. It's not gotten better. My number one advice to people is if you want information about immigration, don't call immigration.
Yeah, that's our standing advice, I think.
All right.
Everyone.
That's very, very interesting. The second is a related question. Ms. Neufeld, you cited the importance of making sure that immigrants understand or have some sort of understanding of Canadian law, and in particular about the exemption to this 2-year conditional period. And my question is similar. Do you think that the knowledge of law, Canadian law, that immigrants have, has that improved over time, or about the same, or gotten less?
I have not seen any change over the time that I've been practicing.
Okay.
I would find that I have seen that immigrants who come into this country are a lot more savvy than they were when I first started my practice. Okay. That was in 2001.
Okay.
I think it depends who it is. For women who are educated, I would say yes. Overall, the education level in terms of immigration has gone up. I mean, with the advent of internet and so much public information. But for women who are uneducated and unable to access it, I think it's not changed at all.
Okay. A different question that I have is inspired by Ms. Taub's opening remarks that you had seen about 1,000 clients and you had rejected about, and please correct me if I'm wrong, you had rejected about 20% of potential clients based on a suspicion of marriage inconvenience.
Yes, simply because I was involved with this lawsuit, and thereafter I've had, for some reason, I seem to have a lot of people, duped sponsors call me from across Canada with their cases, and it's been continuous. I get about 2-3 dozen cases a year of duped sponsors, so I know what the red flags are that would sort of alert me, this isn't a genuine marriage, and this woman or this man doesn't know what they're doing, and I'll spend an hour and a half explaining to them, trying to dissuade them for proceeding with either a marriage if they're not married, or if they're married, trying to dissuade them from doing a sponsorship. But I certainly will not do it, even if they ask me.
Well, my question is, do you think that we can quantify or systematize or institutionalize the intuition that you seem to have developed? And does anybody keep good statistics that could help CIC or some other immigration officer make decisions? And you know, because obviously you've developed some sort of intuition, and maybe this can be systematized.
I think we saw the stats when we were doing our class action was about 20%. CIC was turning down marriages, turning down sponsorships on the belief they might be.
I'm looking for correlations between
Sue, I have to stop
observations
for a minute. The bells are ringing. You can't hear them, but they're ringing, I can assure you. And so we, to continue past the time, I need unanimous consent to continue to 5:30. Is there? Do I have unanimous consent? No. Then the meeting.
The buses are waiting for us, are they?
They are waiting, but I do not have unanimous consent, so
I'm going to be voting for a while.
I'm just the chairman. Order, please. I'm just the chairman following rules, and the meeting, unfortunately, is over. The three of you have given us great legal perspective on the problems that we're having with this study. I want to, on behalf of the committee, I thank you for coming. Thank you. This meeting is adjourned.